Trainer down! Trainer in the water! Call 911 now! Get the medics, now!
She was the face of SeaWorld Orlando, a woman who had spent decades dancing on the edge of danger, working with some of the most intelligent predators on Earth. Dawn Brancheau wasn't just a trainer. She was a mentor, a performer, a friend to the ocean's giants. Her bond with Tilikum, the largest killer whale in captivity, was built on trust, or so everyone thought. But on February 24th, during what should have been a routine post-show interaction, that trust was shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. Before hundreds of stunned onlookers, Tilikum pulled Dawn into the water, and what followed would change SeaWorld forever. Stay with me until the very end, because the details you're about to hear, the hidden history of this whale, the warnings ignored, and the truth SeaWorld didn't want you to know, will change the way you see marine parks forever. Dawn Brancheau was more than a SeaWorld trainer. She was a symbol of grace and skill in one of the most demanding professions in the world. At 40 years old, with over 16 years at SeaWorld Orlando, Dawn had earned a reputation that few in the marine animal world could match. Colleagues called her the gold standard, calm under pressure, precise in her movements, and deeply connected to every animal she worked with. One colleague later said,
Dawn didn't just train orcas, she understood them. She had this unspoken language with them. You'd swear they trusted her more than anyone else.
Her favorite assignment was the Dean with Shamu show, a more intimate experience than the stadium performances, where guests could see the bond between trainer and whale up close. And at the center of that bond was Tilikum, or Tilly as some staff called him, the largest killer whale in captivity, 22.5 feet long, 12,000 pounds of muscle and instinct. Tilikum was a powerful presence in the park, both admired for his size and feared for his history. Dawn knew the risks. She also knew his past. But years of working alongside him had built what seemed like unshakable trust. In her eyes, he wasn't a monster. He was a partner, a friend. And on that February afternoon, she had no reason to think he would betray her. Long before he became the star of SeaWorld Orlando, Tilikum's life began in the cold, steel-gray waters off the coast of Iceland. In November 1983, at just 2 years old, he was violently separated from his pod, a chaotic capture operation involving speedboats, nets, and explosives to herd the whales. He was small then, barely a fraction of the size he would become, and from that moment on, his life was measured not in miles swum, but in the walls of concrete tanks. Tilikum's first home in captivity was Sealand of the Pacific, a marine park in British Columbia, Canada. There he shared a cramped pool with 2 older female orcas, and it was far from a peaceful arrangement. Orcas are highly social, but in captivity, forced hierarchies often lead to aggression. The females routinely raked him with their teeth, a dominance display that left scars along his sides. To make matters worse, at night, the whales were confined together in a dark, metal-sided module, just 20 feet across. There was nowhere to hide. In February 1991, tragedy struck. A young marine biology student named Kelty Byrne slipped into the pool during a training session. Witnesses watched in horror as Tilikum and the 2 females prevented her from reaching the surface. She drowned before rescuers could intervene. Though the exact motivations will never be known, that day marked Tilikum's first involvement in a human death. After Sealand closed later that year, Tilikum was purchased by SeaWorld and moved to Orlando in 1992. He was a prize acquisition, the largest captive orca in the world, and genetically valuable as a breeding male. But along with his size came his history and his unpredictability. At SeaWorld, he was involved in another fatality in 1999. A man named Daniel Dukes was found dead, draped across Tilikum's back one morning. He had entered the tank after hours. Officially, the cause was listed as hypothermia and drowning, but injuries on his body painted a more violent picture. By 2010, Tilikum had been linked to 2 human deaths. Former trainers quietly voiced their concerns. His size made him impossible to control if he chose not to cooperate, and his past behavior showed flashes of unpredictability. Yet corporate decisions leaned toward profit over caution. Tilikum remained in shows, continued breeding, and was still a central draw for visitors from around the world. Warnings existed. History had spoken. But the shows went on. It was a cool but sunny winter afternoon in Orlando, February 24th, 2010. The temperature hovered in the low 60s, comfortable enough for a crowd of tourists to enjoy the midday Dine with Shamu show at SeaWorld's Shamu Stadium. Families leaned forward in their seats, plates of food in hand, ready for the rare chance to watch one of the world's largest killer whales from just a few feet away. Laughter, cameras clicking, children pointing excitedly at the massive dorsal fin slicing the water. Backstage, Dawn Brancheau prepared as she had hundreds of times before. Her wetsuit was zipped, her headset secure, her cues memorized. This was the intimate portion of the day. No loud music, no choreographed spectacle. Just her and Tilikum, showcasing their bond to an audience seated close enough to see every detail. Before stepping out, she gave Tilikum a final series of hand signals. Her body language calm, precise. He responded as expected, swimming slowly toward the stage. The routine was simple. Dawn would lie flat on her stomach at the pool's edge, her face just inches from the water, and Tilikum would glide up to meet her. A tender, almost playful interaction that had become a signature moment for guests. From the audience's perspective, it was perfect. The gentle giant and his trusted trainer, locked in a moment of connection. But witnesses would later recall something different in Tilikum that day. Trainers in the stands, guests with a keen eye. They noticed how still he was, how his gaze stayed locked on Dawn. His movements are slower, more deliberate, as if something unseen was shifting beneath the surface. At 1:38 p.m. it happened. Without warning, Tilikum surged forward. In one violent motion, he seized Dawn by her ponytail. Some reports at the time claimed it was her scalp, and yanked her into the water. The impact was so fast that many in the audience thought it was part of the show, a spontaneous trick. But as seconds passed, smiles faded. The whale wasn't releasing her. The water churned, the struggle obvious. Panic began to ripple through the stands. From that moment on, nothing would be the same, for Dawn, for Tilikum, or for SeaWorld. Beneath the surface, the scene was chaos. In an instant, the calm partnership between trainer and whale had dissolved into a deadly struggle. Tilikum, 12,000 pounds of raw muscle, now had Dawn in his grasp. Witnesses later described the violence in shocking detail. The massive black and white body thrashing in the water, his tail sending shockwaves through the pool. Each movement created a surge powerful enough to knock a grown man off his feet. Dawn fought to free herself, but against that size, that strength, the odds were impossibly stacked. Every time she reached for the surface, Tilikum's jaws would pull her back into the deep blue. On the pool deck, fellow trainers sprang into action. Emergency recall signals, sharp whistles, slaps on the water's surface were deployed. A recall bucket, filled with fish and ice, was lowered in a desperate attempt to lure Tilikum away. Nothing worked. They tried nets, stretching them across the pool in hopes of creating a barrier. They waved and shouted from the edges, anything to break his fixation. But Tilikum was locked in. He ignored every cue, every command. He wasn't performing anymore. He was in control. 1:38 p.m., the moment of the initial grab. By 1:40 p.m., the first attempts to intervene had already failed. Trainers were shouting into radios, calling for security, for emergency responders. The crowd, now fully aware this was no act, began to scream and cry. From 1:40 to 1:45, the struggle continued. The water churned violently, turning frothy white. Trainers leaned dangerously close to the edge, trying to reach Dawn when she surfaced. But each time, Tilikum's massive head would roll, and she would vanish again. At approximately 1:48 p.m., Dawn broke the surface briefly, her face visible for just a second, before Tilikum pulled her under for the last time. The injuries she sustained were devastating. The official autopsy later revealed blunt force trauma from repeated impacts, drowning as the cause of death, broken ribs, a dislocated knee, and severe scalp avulsion. The ponytail that had once been her trademark ripped away in the attack. For years, Dawn had been Tilikum's trusted partner. She fed him, trained him, swam alongside him. That bond, so often romanticized in SeaWorld's glossy marketing, was shattered in less than 10 minutes. What had been a symbol of harmony between human and animal had now become a nightmare playing out before hundreds of horrified witnesses. For more than 45 minutes after the initial grab, Tilikum remained in possession of Dawn's body. Trainers and safety staff could only watch in horror, their options exhausted, their voices raw from shouting commands he ignored. Finally, whether from exhaustion or decision, Tilikum released her. Staff moved instantly. Her body was pulled from the water onto the pool deck. The stadium was nearly empty now. Families had been ushered out, leaving behind the eerie stillness that follows catastrophe. Paramedics were already on site. They began CPR immediately, chest compressions, rescue breaths, everything they could to reverse the unthinkable. But there was no pulse. Dawn had been under too long. The official cause of death, later released by the Orange County Medical Examiner, was blunt force trauma combined with drowning. The injuries were severe: broken bones, dislocated joints, and the devastating scalp avulsion that had first allowed Tilikum to pull her in. Within days, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, launched a formal investigation. They began compiling records of every incident involving Tilikum and other SeaWorld orcas. What they found painted a disturbing picture. Internal logs detailed near misses, trainer injuries, and repeated warnings from former staff about Tilikum's unpredictability. Some trainers had openly refused to work with him, citing safety concerns. Yet he remained the park's star attraction and breeding male. SeaWorld's defense was unwavering. They argued that Dawn's death was a tragic accident, not a predictable outcome, and that their safety protocols were sufficient. But former trainers began speaking out, challenging that narrative. They described a culture where the thrill of performance and corporate profit often outweighed safety warnings. Public backlash swelled, amplified 3 years later by the release of the documentary Blackfish. The film exposed not just Dawn's death, but the hidden costs of captivity for orcas: psychological distress, aggression, and shortened lifespans. Legally, the impact was swift and lasting. OSHA cited SeaWorld for willful safety violations, imposing new rules that banned trainers from entering the water with orcas during performances. This single regulation would forever alter the way the shows were conducted. Dawn's death wasn't just a tragedy for those who knew her. It became a turning point in the public's perception of marine mammal parks and in the debate over whether such shows should exist at all. In the days and weeks after her death, an outpouring of grief swept across SeaWorld and beyond. Memorials for Dawn appeared at the park gates. Flowers, photographs, handwritten notes from strangers who had been touched by her performances. Former colleagues spoke through tears about her kindness, her meticulous professionalism, and the way she treated each animal as if it were family. Her hometown of Cedar Lake, Indiana, held vigils. Friends recalled her infectious smile, her discipline, her dream. A dream that began as a little girl watching marine shows and ended as one of the most respected orca trainers in the world. But Dawn's passing also reignited a difficult question, one that had been simmering for decades. Should orcas, apex predators of the open ocean, be kept in captivity at all? For some, her death was evidence enough that no amount of training could erase the instinct and power of a wild animal confined to a tank. For others, it underscored the need for better safety protocols, not the end of marine parks altogether. Tilikum, the whale at the center of it all, would spend the rest of his life in isolation, separated from trainers, no longer performing. His health declined in his later years, and in January 2017, he died at SeaWorld Orlando at the estimated age of 36. By then, his story, and Dawn's, had been told and retold in documentaries, courtrooms, and living rooms around the world. Dawn Brancheau's death changed SeaWorld forever, but for the orcas still circling tanks around the world, the debate is far from over. Her life's mission was to inspire people to love marine life, to see the beauty, intelligence, and grace of these animals. Yet the tragedy that took her life became a catalyst for questioning how that love is expressed, and at what cost. If Dawn's story has moved you, like, subscribe, and share it. discuss it, support organizations working toward the ethical treatment of marine animals. Because the conversation she never meant to start is still going.